Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Looks like we have people coming in from all over the world. If you want to comment in the chat box and see where we've got people tuning in from, looks like we've got some people here from Peru and from Paris, Caribbean rainforest. This is really amazing that we're here to honor Terence in this way. I'm going to give you a little bit of a breakdown of the room just so you know where everything's at. On the bottom right, there is a chat box so that you can communicate with people. It's a great way to connect with community through this process. And then we've also got a great place to submit your favorite moments of Terence, also listed at the bottom of the screen. It's a green button, and we'll be collecting favorite video clips, art, music, links to talks and whatnot, and we'll be posting these on the McKenna Academy website as well as social media. So we'd love to see which moments stand out to you the most. We have a very special program today. Dennis McKenna will be speaking first with Bruce Damer and then followed by Luis Eduardo Luna. So I'm just going to go over the structure of how everything's going to work. First, we'll have an hour-long fireside chat with Dennis McKenna and Bruce Damer, followed by a 30-minute Q&A. Definitely take note of there's a button at the bottom of the screen that says ask a question. So this is where you'll be asking your questions for the Q&A portion. And if you'll see that you can actually upvote questions, that's definitely important. We may not have time to get to everyone's questions. So questions with more votes will be prioritized. Definitely check that out as the talk is going. You don't have to wait till the end to ask these questions. Following the Q&A, we'll have a 30-minute breakout session, and Bruce Damer will be in one of those chat rooms continuing a specific talk on science and magic. So definitely stay tuned for that. Following that, again, we'll have Luis Eduardo Luna with the same, he'll have the same format. Excuse me, it looks like we may have an echo working on things. And then next Saturday, we're going to have the same format. That'll be April 11th, and we will have Paul Stamets and Wade Davis speaking. Following that on April 18th, same format. These start at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time and end at 4:30 p.m. April 18th, we're going to have Rupert Sheldrake and Ralph Abram speaking with Dennis. So let's see what else we need to do to get started. I think this is just about everything. I'm going to bring Dennis on. Dennis McKenna is an ethnopharmacologist with a focus on the study of hallucinogenic plants. He's the founding board founder of the McKenna Academy of Natural Philosophy. Excuse me, getting used to this whole online format. He's also a founding board member of Hefter Research Institute, and he organized the ESPD 50 conference in 2017. The work he has been doing is foundational to the scientific exploration of ayahuasca as well as many other realms. So Dennis, I'm going to bring you on now. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Hi, Genevieve. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, morning, everybody. I see we have about 2,100 people watching. I don't know how many of you were at the event last night. Hopefully, most of you were. So, congratulations. You're real troopers. You have tolerance for this stuff, and it's our job to deliver. So we were delighted with the way it went last night. And now we're going to move into our regular Saturday programs. And so we'll get started. Today we are really blessed to have two of my closest friends, one of whom I've known since 1981, Dr. Luis Eduardo Luna, who will come on a bit later, and Bruce Damer, who I met when he was working with Terence toward the end of the 90s. And do we have a strange echo?
Yeah, no.
Is that you?
Okay, I'm going to go to these.
What's that? Oh. Tech support, where are you? Okay. Can you hear me okay, Bruce?
Hello?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, I assume everyone can hear me. You see the man to my left there, and looking typically shamanic or Christ-like, perhaps. I guarantee you he's not Christ. But I'm just going to read his bio sketch just to introduce you. Some of you may not know who Bruce Damer, sorry, but he's many things. He's a Renaissance man and has had his fingers in many different pies over the years. He's a chronicler of psychedelic history and holds and curates the extant archives of Dr. Timothy Leary, Terence McKenna, and others. He is also a maven of the history of computing. He has a Digibarn computer museum at his place in Santa Cruz in Boulder Creek, and he is an instigator of the old multi-user virtual worlds medium. His current work is as a scientist, co-authoring and testing a new hypothesis for the origin of life and guiding NASA where life might arise in the universe. This is the part of his work that just is utterly fascinating to me. He has just spent 2 decades designing spacecraft and missions for NASA and other space agencies with the objective of opening the solar system to the expansion of life off the Earth. Recently, he's put on a philosopher and public thinker's head, I think he means cap, exploring and considering the questions, how did this all come to be and where is it all going? So these are the big questions, right? These are the overarching questions. And lately he has begun a practice in the healing arts, learning how the human operating system is written and tools and boots up into our personality in response to the world. Knowing and optimizing the human operating systems is perhaps the most important technology of this century and beyond. Bruce, welcome. Great to see you. So why don't you tell us, Bruce, how you met Terence and got involved with his life and his stuff? I remember you didn't really come on my radar until I think the last maybe a couple of years before Terence died, 98, 99. I know you were doing things with him. So why don't we pick up the thread there?
Yeah, so Terence and I were introduced in '97.
Oh, okay.
And we had numerous conversations and emails, and we kind of then decided to somehow merge efforts. He was interested in cyberspace. He had, read enough Omni magazine articles and things like that, and he felt that cyberspace was a powerful medium, not only for knowledge and human interaction, but some kind of mycelial network. And he was talking about it a lot. And so what I did was we tried to arrange for him to come to our Avatars conference, and that didn't work out. So what he did was he came to the house here to Ancient Oaks Farm with Ralph, Abraham, and Finn, I think on the day of Finn's 20th birthday. And I sat him down in front of a big screen right in the room over here and introduced him to a new kind of cyberspace, virtual worlds with avatars, people embodied visually. And they were actually the no-body people that Terence used to say was under your bed. Anyway, and he was kind of gobsmacked about it, and enough that we decided to do the all-chemical virtual powwow experiment, sort of another experiment like the experiment at La Chorrera, but really it was a practical experiment for him to see whether cyberspace could convey the psychedelic experience. Late 90s, low-res, 3D worlds. Could it really communicate that feeling the sense of cyberspace. So we did it. We went to his house in 1999, and we did the alchemical virtual powwow in Active Worlds, and the viewers can find it. It's a video on YouTube called Terence McKenna on the Natch, at home, being an avatar with Finn and me and Christy, and it's a tremendous little piece from his house in Hawaii. And it worked to the extent that I asked Terence, how did this compare? How did this DMT inflected world and this hyperboreal gate that everyone went through to enter it, how did it compare with DMT? And he replied in a perfect Terenceism, it's not unlike DMT. Now you're muted. Oh, wait a minute.
Am I muted?
Now you're back.
Okay. So he said it was not unlike DMT, but in fact it's different than DMT. Did he have anything to say about that? Did he think that this system could supplant psychedelics?
Well, that was his fascination.
Mm-hmm.
That was his fascination. And you know, we were tunneled in over that satellite dish from his house, and we were in a virtual world. We were also in a I'd say an altered state. So they are related. They really are related. And we talked late into the night about that and novelty and machine intelligence and the eschaton and singularities.
Right. I'm getting things coming through on the text thread that shows that people are still having audio problems. Can everyone in the audience hear me?
Dennis, we can definitely hear you. Bruce, I'm wondering if you may have another tab with this same window open. We're hearing a slight echo. Just wondering if you might be able to check your browser.
No, there's no other tabs.
Okay. Well, again, thank you everybody for being patient with the echo. We can hear you, and the content is really amazing. Thank you both for speaking.
Yeah. Now I'm getting feedback that that audio is working. So this is humbling, I mean, like we said last night, the tech is great when it works, but it always turns on you, at the most critical moment. So, so that's what you guys worked on, and where did that go? Did you eventually do events, or I mean, that was right in the critical period when Terence was ill, so he probably had bigger fish to fry in some ways than, to try and do another big virtual event. Were you at the Alchemical Arts Conference that he staged? You were there.
Yeah. So
I did not go, but how was that? That was an actual physical conference on the Big Island.
Yeah, so what happened for the listeners is, well, Jim and I were at Terence's house, and one of the things that Jim said about Terence was, oh my God, he doesn't look good. He's ashen-faced. He's not looking well compared to a year ago. And Terence actually commented to us that I'm having dreams I can't explain. They're so weird. They're so strange. And we thought, wow, if Terence is having dreams that are disturbing to him, then something is going on. And it was perhaps the early indication of the tumor that was about to erupt. So about 2 months after we were there, he had the seizure. And Christy took him off the mountain, and the whole cycle began. And Ken Symington and his team had already planned a conference for Kona called Alchemical Arts, which was in sort of alternate to time to Palenque. And we were all invited, and we realized this could be the goodbye for Terence, for us to say goodbye. And so everyone came, and Alex and Allison, Robert Venosa and Martina, Tom Robbins, the writer. It was a tremendous group. Constance Demby shipped her space base by ocean, and it was a tremendous meeting. And at one point, Terence commented, this is toward the end, and we were kind of saying our goodbyes, and Terence suddenly blurted out, posthumous glory, that's where the action is. So here we are.
Yes, yes, indeed. I mean, it's interesting that Terence, YouTube didn't exist when he passed on, and yet, when it did come on, he's kind of achieved a second. Well, I wouldn't call it life, but there's certainly an active presence on the internet thanks to YouTube and other sources, but that's probably the main one. And I guess in part it's a testimony to how much material there is. I mean, Lorenzo Haggerty, I don't know if he's on today, but he mentioned last night he has an enormous archive of Terence's material from doing Psychedelic Salon for so many years. And I believe you can access most of that. So Terence is very much part of the cultural conversation still. The difference is that a lot has happened since he more or less left the stage. And I wonder, so what we're getting from Terence is sort of like this oracular voice out of cyberspace, is his take on the global planetary situation, which he's been talking about since the early 90s. And I think it's a testament to either, to how prescient he is, that so many have what he says, the talks that you can access on the internet are so very timely. They could have been made yesterday, or maybe not yesterday, but recently. It's as though he anticipated all these changes. And yet, when he died, we were at the end of the millennium and the end of the 20th century. He didn't quite make it to the 21st century. But so much of what he talked about and anticipated was about the future, about what was going to happen. What do you think his perspective would be now, Bruce? Especially that the 21st century is turning out to be pretty grim in a lot of ways. But also, as always, promising. I mean, it's always a two-edged sword. But what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, in some ways, I don't really agree that it's turned out to be grim. I think that there's so much that is good going on, but it's overshadowed by the grim narrative, which is a really dangerous thing.
Right.
But Terence would have identified something very, very clearly about this day that I think that we're getting a strong look at with the COVID-19. Terence used to say, why are we led by the least among us? And being the least competent, the least conscious, the least present, the least heart empathic or caring, and the least mentally capable, why are we led by these people? And this is what it really has led to. In this country, we have rocketing infection rates from COVID, a gutted social health system and unemployment system that was gutted over 30 years by the insanity of ideologues and in a sense, banksters and corporate and large investors who gutted our social welfare net. And so
Yeah.
now 30% of the people are going to fall through it. And, you know, it's absurd that we spent $3 trillion on absolutely pointless and destructive wars with no one saying a peep. And
Right.
we are now indebted, and it was all completely clear that we were being led by the least among us. And, people, unlike the 60s and 70s, there aren't the mass protests, there aren't the pushes. People are very anesthetized. And perhaps this is the wake-up call that we need strong leadership in this century. We need to replace that entire set of people and electoral methodologies and money buying legislation. And I think Terence would have really come out strongly as his audience had grown.
Yeah, I mean the points you raise are very good, but it seems like, yeah, clearly we need this reform. We need this reform of government, our institutions, our medical infrastructure, everything. And yet, as a species, we don't plan for these disasters. We know that these things are going to happen. We're having the biggest pandemic since 1918 now, and we know there are others in the future. We could have seen this coming. I mean, theoretically, we knew it was coming. We couldn't say what the date was, but we knew. I mean, years ago, we knew there was going to be this. So why is this happening, Bruce? Why is the body politic unable, to elect competent leaders? I mean, why is it so dysfunctional that government is actually an obstacle to solving some of these problems? You can't just get rid of government because that's the only thing that's holding anything together. I mean, we're in a fine mess, and I think all of these things are coming together in such a way that, the COVID virus, as we said last night, is about as benign a pandemic as it could be in terms of its overall impact, and yet it's shutting down global commerce. It's shutting down, what holds the world together, transportation, supply chains, all of this. Is this a message from Gaia saying, basically, look how easy it is to completely disable all your systems, and yeah, this is very humbling. What do we do about it? Go ahead.
I've been doing a practice that I call realming. And I started this when I was a little kid, where my consciousness goes through space and time. So one of the things it did was go into the solar system to figure out how to gain access to that in this century. Another thing is it went back to the origin of life to try to figure out how we emerged. But it smears out through time. And so starting about 30 years ago, I started to see these waves in the 2020s and 2030s, this kind of crazy dynamic. And the reason I bought this property here, this farm here, was to prepare for those crazy waves and to establish a solid base. I stopped listening to news media. So I don't mainline all that cultural anxious content because I needed to be super clear to be able to see and not carried by the waves, but watching the storm from, the prow of the ship or whatever. And as a result, I think that I can get downloads on this thing. And about 2 years ago, I thought pandemics are coming and they're going to be like the Spanish flu. And we even spun a company out from campus to create a small interfering RNA to prepare to create a universal blocker for viral pandemics, and that's ongoing. And I'm talking to investors to try to get that accelerated. But the second thing that happened when COVID was breaking out, I saw an image. Think of your hair like here. I saw a comb going through hair over and over again. And I realized this was Gaia, or the homeostatic system of the planet, doing its natural thing to come back to health and homeostasis, to start to cull out the impact of a overpopulated species. And when I was a kid in Canada, this happened to our local deer population when there were no wolves in the area, and we cut all the trees down, and there was all this foraging, and the deer population just exploded. So there was a disease that came through, a virus that came through, and there was massive die-off. And I watched this as a kid. They reintroduced the wolves, and they asked hunters to hunt more deer to try to establish this homeostasis again. And I think that this is what's happening. And I think that it almost has an intelligence to it, because if you look at all of life as being in one mycelial grid, one intelligence, if you look at life as a single entity, it is going to move. If it has a stomach ache, it's going to move toward solving the stomach ache, which means excavation. And the whole of Gaia may be an internetworked system, and human beings themselves may represent an internetworked superorganism at this point. And so this combing through of COVID does several things. It will trim our population, but it will trim our demand. It will trim our number of trips we're taking, restaurants we're going to, stuff we're orbiting online. It will focus us on being with each other, reestablishing eye-to-eye contact, and getting out of this hyper-driven, performative, too much information, bring the noise level down. And it's like, guys, take a breath and look at each other. And it's a wake up. So I think that the COVID is a master teacher, and it's going to be painful, but if COVID-19 will yield to COVID-21 and COVID-24 and all the mutations and the things that will keep coming, there's going to be wave upon wave of these things, and it's going to reshape us. And to your point originally, I think it's going to create a distaste for the kind of leadership, this sort of extremist leadership backed by fake news and basically lying, public lying, because people need facts if they're going to survive. If a country or a state in the US fell under the ideological influence that said, well, everyone go out and party, and 30% of the population dies, they're going to lose that ideology pretty fast. It's Darwinian natural selection at the species level, at the mimetic level and the genetic level, to bring the planet and us into homeostasis.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. This is part of the process. You know, you talk about the virus as a this is Gaia culling the herd in a certain sense, but there's not significant amounts of culling going on. I mean, we have 7 billion people, or closer to 7.5 now. And as callous and cold as it sounds to say it, if 200 million people die, that's a tiny fraction of the population, unfortunately. And these now the next pandemic could be much worse, and will bring out, will take out much higher parts of the portion of the population. This is not an outcome that we like to think about, because we are the species that's being culled. But Gaia is not sentimental. Gaia is oriented towards survival and maintenance of the homeostasis, and we're pushing all those envelopes to the nth degree, and that's why our societal and economic systems and infrastructure and so on is under such pressure. And I guess my question is there a way, will things ever go back to normal, or is there a way that we can come to the new situation and minimize death, minimize the number of deaths, and get through this transition? And then an aspect of that, what you're talking about, is, will this wise us up? Will this make us realize we have to prepare for COVID 2021, COVID 2024? It looks like this is the future for now. Will we rise to the occasion, or will it be like global warming or climate change? When 30 years ago, we knew that climate change was coming. We knew that if we began to do things at that point to get ready for it, we could slow it down. Well, nobody did anything. So now we're in like a major crisis around climate change on top of the pandemic. Climate change doesn't end just because you're having a pandemic. It only gets worse. So what do you do, Bruce? You and I are supposed to be people that are broadcasting a positive message here. But sometimes I think it's very hard to do that, and not deliberately being deceptive. Truth is hard. The truth is a hard thing to listen to sometimes.
Here's an approach. To address your first question, I think that we will go back to some semblance of normal, and then the metabolic body of humans will start to expect to come back to where it was, right? And it will charge up, but with less veracity. The air travel will come up about 30%, and then people will sort of come back into it. And then if we're hit again, if there's an eruption again, as there was in 1919 with the Spanish flu, it kept erupting all over the world. My grandmother's family, a lot of them died in Ladner, BC, by a 1919 eruption. Yeah. And so then it will shape us again. It's like, oh, you thought it was safe to go back in the water, but it isn't. And then the evolutionary shaping can start. So if viral pandemics are the chosen method to tame this wild beast of human desire and consumption, it's going to do it in a kind of staged way, again and again and again, and slow the metabolic rate, the rate of consumption. Because, if you go back to 1980, I think I saw a statistic that in the United States, there was only about 50% of the built up retail and restaurants that you have in 2020, but the population is only about 25% more or so. So all of this was built, and people feel they need it. They go and they buy more expensive houses, they buy all this stuff, and they get into deeper debt. But back when I was a kid, in the 60s, we didn't go to restaurants at all. My mother made everything at home. So our impact was low. So what if we did lose 50% of the retail? 50%. And what if we lost 70% of the stuff that is being shipped from China that we don't really need? It ends up in landfills. That would be a major follow-on effect for sustainability. And so perhaps this is the most intelligent, gentlest way to step us off that ledge. you know, because if there's less demand in the economy, there's less reason to burn more of the Amazon and raise more cattle for more hamburgers, for more fast food, or whatever you name it. Lower the
Right.
metabolic rate, and you lower the gas emissions into the atmosphere, as we're seeing.
Yes, but it will take a long time to turn that around, you know, the gas emissions, but you probably will slow it down somewhat, you know. And the future that you anticipate, which is less consumer oriented, less economic activities, people are not buying huge houses or all this mindless consumerism and waste that contributes to, you know, has contributed to the problem. But then on the sort of human resources side, how do you deal with all the people who are losing their livelihood,
Mm-hmm.
who depend on this consumer retail, you know, economy? I mean, what are they going to do? How are we going to take care of the people most at risk? I think in part, well, certainly it requires a change in perspective. It requires we reintroduce, you know, the notion of compassion into society.
Mm-hmm.
We're a society that has a serious compassion deficit,
Yeah.
you know, and that is certainly supported by our leaders who are apparently incapable of compassion. So you get this mindset that, well, for example, you know, reactivating economic activity is more important than saving lives. So you choose profit, you know, you basically make a conscious decision to, you know, in favor of genocide. I mean, let's call it for what it
Yeah.
is.
Mm-hmm.
It's better
Mm-hmm.
to lose millions, hundreds of thousands of lives than to let the economy go down. This is not, I mean, this is a very twisted attitude. It's not an ethical attitude.
I have a suggestion that it may not matter what leadership does, that this thing is underway. So what's happening here on the farm, here in Ancient Oaks Farm, people assembled when this thing started. We just planted a large vegetable garden out there. Just literally, the seeds went in because it just started raining. And what you're going to see, as you've seen the trend in the Bay Area and also the millennial generation, they can't afford all the consumerism. They don't have job security, so they live communally. And here at Wildflower, at the farm here, we're building a community. We're going to have half a dozen or 8 or 9 people living here. No single family homes. I mean, those are disappearing. Those are going on the way out. We're living collectively. When you live collectively and you buy healthier foods collectively, you grow your food, you share in finance, everything, you're much healthier and you're much more sustainable. So if someone's out of a job, others can help. Others are making dinners for them. It's a new way to live, and yet it was the old way we lived back in the 1930s, and we lived in communal houses. We lived in villages, and that produced robust, sustainable, and healthy lifestyles. And this whole separation into the consumer in their box, working for the corporation in a box, to do something virtual called your retirement planning, such that you go to heaven. You know, when the temple at Eleusis was destroyed, this is the system that was introduced by the apostolic church, right? Pay your tithes, and then you get the access to the kingdom of heaven. That's perhaps a myth and a lifestyle that's going to go away, because the millennial and iGen generations, they're not going to have, and they're not going to be investing in the stock market and mutual funds and all this kind of nonsense, because that may be also deflated, so that institutional investors have lost half their wealth, and they've lost it permanently. So their political power is shaky. and you see a new society rising, communal living, group living, using the tools invented right here in the Bay Area, all this fantastic social networking, using the sharing economy, and building a new society from the bottom up, and it just pushes the old one off. And it's already underway. This is underway here and many places, and I think that the comments are raising that issue, and that political power comes from those who can create wealth. And I was on a cruise about 5 years ago called Summit at Sea, where there were at least $300 billion in private wealth. The founders of Uber and Google and all were there. And I realized when standing on the deck of this huge ship, we were watching Edward Snowden on a Jumbotron. And everyone in that audience agreed and supported what Edward was saying. And I realized this is the new power. This is the new political power rising out of the roots of Silicon Valley and creative communities. And you see the old power, the people who decided Snowden was bad, rather than that he was creating transparency and trying to liberate us. Those people are threatened by this new rising power that is coming from wealth creators who created cyberspace and for reinventing transportation, that energy, everything. And it's just really a matter of time before the new rising wealth plus the new way of living. And they talk about hipsters, hippies, and hackers, right? Those are the I've been described as both a hippie and a hacker and a little bit of a hipster. Catherine here is my beloved. She's trying to make me more hip, you know. But the HHH, the 3H people, are freaking taking over. And so I see that as a huge positive thing. And we are on this Crowdcast platform because of hackers, hippies, and hipsters who created a new medium that the entire world now depends upon. Guess who has controlling the levers behind the curtain right now? And I think if we acknowledge that and don't pay much heed to the old guard, because they're not serving us, we say we have the power. And psychedelics coming into the culture now is a powerful tool from hippies to hackers that help make all this. And it's a hipster tool too. This is our medicine. This is our elixir. This is going to transform the freaking world. You know, it started with marijuana, and this is sort of bringing the conversation back to the subject Terence loves so much, but it's all coming to pass.
Yeah, it's coming to pass, but it's so what do you do? Yeah, I mean, this is, we've always anticipated this. We always thought psychedelics will be the catalyst that wakes up the world. And what we have to get out from under is 2,000 years of devaluation of nature, you know, what has been shoved down our throat in the guise of the Abrahamic religions, which is basically an excuse to devalue nature, to approach it as a commodity, something that we exploit. Nature is bitch slapping us right now and saying, hey, wait a minute, you're forgetting who's boss here. Nature is the boss, and it's demonstrating that very clearly, and certainly not as brutally as it might, but that's a necessary wake-up call. I hope you're right that as we develop these new social paradigms, these new frameworks for living together, I guess you could call it, living communally, consuming less, everyone supports everyone. The idea that if you don't have a job, if you don't go to the work every morning and work in a cubicle, that you're somehow not a worthy human being. Many people don't have that kind of jobs, but many people that, when you have a more holistic community, there's a role for everyone, and there's a more room for compassion, and because everyone is faced with the same challenges, and so we can have empathy. I don't know why. I think a lot of our problem is that there is not enough empathy in the world, and it's almost as though to be empathetic with someone is denounced, and this is more the American mindset than other places, like everyone for themselves. We've always had this preoccupation with individualism in the States, and other
that's
countries.
that's really shifting now, because I'm in touch with all the Silicon Valley ventures. I do healing work. I'm in an energy healing and awakening school that has two very wealthy venture capital people. They're in the healing school with us. They're experienced. They're really awake. They're really present, and they're pulling the levers of power because they decide on what billions of dollars go into new ventures. And so as those people become more heart-centered, I've watched this over 5 years. One of my dear friends in this luminous awareness school that I've been in for 4 or 5 years, he has transformed. This is what we talked about in the introduction, the human OS. So beyond psychedelics, beyond technical solutions, beyond ideologies, how humans roll and will roll in the future comes from how they are feeling down here, how the experiences they had as babies, as 5-year-olds, as 10-year-olds, as 15-year-olds shaped them, and their lineage, their cultural lineage, familial lineage going back. And what we have learned to do in this time is to unravel the OS of humans. Eckhart Tolle gave us the first glimpse in the early 90s when he talked about the pain body, which was he would trigger his patients into a kind of emotional eruption or a closing down or a verbal tirade because he touched some painful part in them that then took over their system and ran them. And he would record the clients and play the recordings back. And the clients had gone what he called unconscious. And they couldn't believe that they were taken over. It's like Jekyll and Hyde. And so that set off a whole inquiry that has merged neuroscience, pharmacopoeia, the energy and healing arts, the energy healing for real, which involves attunement and tracking, not fantasy, not ideation in the new age. This stuff is working. I'm literally day to day, I watch it, and I watch my own little inner kindergarten, my little wounded parts running around. And when I see Donald Trump, I see his wounded little boy in there in multiple parts, and that he reacts based upon the touching of those painful parts that were created by his father as he was a little kid. And so I have compassion for the man because he suffers. He's dissociated all the time. He's acting out. It's crazy. But I have compassion because Donald Trump has the chance in his lifetime of release from that torment, from those cycling voices, from that me thing, and from those triggers. He has a chance, just like everyone in the world has a chance as release from that wheel of samsara, if you will. And we're nailing this. We're figuring out how humans boot up. And plant medicines are a really important tool. And so is Vipassana, and so is breath work, and so is Wim Hof, and so is extreme sports. and so is better diet, because our gut biome drives our psychology so much, and we're learning that the gut biome is attached to disease and how you feel and how you react emotionally. It's incredible. So as we enter the 2020s, we have all the tools we need to help create generation upon generation of healthier and healthier and saner and more compassionate human beings. We can do this thing. We can do it if we as techies, hackers, hippies, and hipsters say, this is our project. It is the healed human. It is the high functioning, beautiful, whimsical, a human who's not triggered all the time, who's not triggered by the culture, it's not triggered by fake news. They are wise, but they're super present, and they're fun to be around, and they're really brilliant at leadership and at science and everything. We can do this if we own it as a project. And this is the work I'm taking on in the world, is that we can create that beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. And to quote Charles Eisenstein, we can do it. We have all the tools, and we have smartphones, and we have this, and we've never been better prepared, but we just have to take ownership. This is our project.
I mean, this is a great vision. I mean, this is a very hopeful narrative that you're presenting here. You know, I have two questions though, or two what you might call lingering doubts or wondering. One of them is the scenario that you describe is going to take decades, possibly generations, to really come into flower, right? The path toward planetary disaster and total collapse of all the systems is it's on a fast track. It's accelerating. So my first question is, do we have time enough to evolve into this, or will events overtake us? And despite the best of intentions, you know, will we be unable to do it? This is my concern about plant medicines too. You know, apart from how we're going to make those sustainable and so on, those problems can be addressed. But can you get enough people to plant medicines in time to get enough people to wake up to make a difference? So that's one question. The other thing is the entrenched power structures, the power hegemony right now that's working under the old model. They're not just going to quietly, you know, say, okay, we screwed it up. Now you guys can take it over and fix it. And they will not go quietly or peacefully. How do we deal with those two things, the acceleration and the reluctance of the entrenched power structures to yield the floor, as it were?
So I think that if I realm forward into, say, the 2060s and 2070s, when I'll be 100 and you'll be like 300 years old.
Well, not quite, but I don't really expect to be around unless there's some major breakthroughs, and that may be a good thing. I mean, this may be a situation where the term Grateful Dead really has meaning, you know.
Terence's favorite band, yeah.
Yeah.
So what I'm seeing in the 60s and 70s, because pretty much the projects that I undertook, like, how did we begin as a life on this earth? And therefore, how does evolution work? That was a 90-year project I took on when I was 14. And then when I was 16, I took on the project of how do we expand Gaia herself into the solar system and extend life and build more worlds for her, duplicate the cell, the supercell of Earth, and make new ones. And the technical solutions I presented in 2015 in 2 TEDx talks, which the listeners can see on damer.com. And those are underway. And I'm counting on those 2 things to help lift human beings into a new sense of hope, that we, in the origin of life, that what we may have shown is that human beings and all of life did not start as competing individuals, duking it out, the first simple protocells 4 billion years ago. It started as a communal complex of simple protocells in collaboration. And we may be able to show this in the 2020s. And it's as powerful a cultural idea as Albert Einstein's proof of general relativity in 1919 that created this revolution of modernism in the 1920s. This powerful idea that we emerged from a common community, not from competing ancestors. And we can show this chemically in the lab. So that's that one. To your original question, I think there's a bigger plan for us, and that there's some script writer somewhere who said, this is the ultimate Hollywood thriller. Human beings and their relationship with their world as they grow up and shape up and stand up and get wise. It's a Hollywood thriller, and there's going to be a car chase at the end. It's always going to come down to that stressful, dramatic thing that is all the way evolution always works. So if you look at a gazelle being chased by a cheetah, for example, it's dramatic. There's initially the gazelle makes some progress, and then there's a moment of decision. The gazelle slips, or the cheetah pauses somehow, and either the gazelle is captured or the cheetah runs out of energy. And it's always that knife edge. And that's what I think we're headed toward. We're headed toward where we stack up all the things that can help us survive that cheetah chase, and all the things that we're facing, and we have awareness: burning rainforests, consumption, crazy weather patterns, pandemics. And then we have all these tools here. And we write a script that says, we're going to, when the stress gets intense, we're going to punch through because we have all the tools and we have awareness. Hollywood thriller ending. And we have several more decades. I mean, I think we have the entire run rate of this century, because I don't see the signs of really severe climate change yet. The second question is the power structures. Well, what I've been doing in the last year or so is working with an admiral from the Pentagon, who I met in Qatar in the Middle East about a year and a quarter ago. And what we cooked up was something called Climate Mitigation Associates, a huge global effort involving trillions of dollars of finance to transform, to protect infrastructure. That's what attracts companies and cities, but to transform economics. And every time we've put the CMA vision, which we call climate moonshots, every time we've put it out there, I put it to bankers, I've put it to generals and admirals, I've put it to governments, I've put this vision out to Silicon Valley VC, and our whole group has. There's a huge uptake on this. Like, how do we sign on for climate moonshots and the CMA? How do we? And it's across the board. So if we create if we create separation and say there is a mysterious power structure out there that will not, they have these secret meetings and they have their own Zoom sessions now, and they're trying to do their own thing. I don't think that exists. I think it's individuals and their little stovepipes trying to get their kids through college and trying to do their best. And if we create this ogre, if we create the bogeyman that there is such a power structure and it's all so intelligent, I think we're deluding ourselves. Because, for the last 20 years, I've moved in and out of all those communities, and I find human beings. That's what I find there is human beings. And so engagement in the common vision, if we have to spend 15 trillion, we've got 15 trillion. It's all locked up in these ridiculous funds that are underperforming. So you can change your language and talk to a finance person. You can change your language again and talk to somebody who's heading a corporation. Change your language again and talk to the hippie hipster, techie, and they'll all just say, yeah, we want this beautiful experiment in the human experiment at Earth, at Terra, to continue, and we're listening. So they're looking for leadership too. They're looking for clear, compassionate, and logical, not made up stuff, like real engineering solutions is what they're looking for.
Well, very interesting. Yeah. Maybe, I mean, I am not sure that, again, I think this is a beautiful vision, and I hope this is where it's evolving. I'm not sure that radical climate change is that far away. It depends on what who you believe, what the projections are. I mean, maybe we have till 2050, maybe we have till 2100. I don't know, but it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as the political changes, I guess we're experiencing that right now. I mean, we're in a place now where, at least in the States, because of the virus and all that's affected, the electoral system is apparently completely dysfunctional. It will be very interesting to see how it turns out. I'm afraid it may turn out not in a way that most of us would want to see it, because this is an opportunity for essentially the authoritarian to retreat into authoritarianism.
Mm-hmm.
This seems to be a trend in many parts of the world. And in some ways, you can see if government is going to, solve some of these problems, they have to have centralized power to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, assuming that they have some element of compassion. But how do you see us avoiding that and avoiding retreating into authoritarianism or authoritarianism becomes the global governing standard, and this more holistic, more symbiotic type of society
Mm-hmm.
is just suppressed? I mean, it's just not seen as it's not allowed to flourish because the power is concentrated elsewhere and has no respect for human life at all.
I think that what we have to also realize is the authoritarianism of the 1930s, for example, where there really was an effective secret police system in many countries leading up to World War II. I lived in Czechoslovakia starting in 1990, just as the Berlin Wall had fallen. I went to Eastern Europe. I went to Yugoslavia during the war in Yugoslavia. And I saw what authoritarianism looked like from its immediate aftermath. And we are nowhere near that system. In fact, we don't have a referent for that type of authoritarian system. And the people that I knew, I employed people who had been through what was called Absurdistan after the Prague Spring. And they said, basically, you can't do this. You couldn't do this again because everybody carries in their hand a supercomputer that is a window on the world.
Yeah.
Authoritarianism needs absolute control of information. In the Soviet Union, typewriters were illegal, for example, for the public, or copiers of any kind. The cat is out of the bag on that one. We are interconnected. And so what you see in the world today is would-be authoritarian figures have a very limited range of power, very limited ability to move. In fact, Dennis, you might recall in our fireside chat at Wilkatika that I had that experience with the lucuma tree one night. It was it was a beautiful download vision of a dance with her. And I think I might have shared it the next day, that I showed her what psychopathy was in the human soul. Like, what is the psychopathic response? And I danced out to the end of one of the shadows of the limbs. And I said, and it's getting less intense. The psychopaths, their teeth are kind of a little bit worn down compared to Putin in Russia or Trump in America, compared to predecessors like Stalin, what they were able to do. So their power is being contained by this massive network of a sharing network, which in the origin of life field we call the progenote. The progenote is the network system we think led to the booting up of the living world 4 billion years ago. And the progenote is coming into its dominance. It's saying everything's internetworked now, and it's moving toward health. So if there's local issues, those are dissolved and moved as this thing rolls. And you can sort of, in a way, anyone in this room could take one of the elixirs and go into a state. And I know you've done this, Dennis, because the plant showed you one night how photosynthesis worked and how food was made. We could all use the doorway available to us to talk to Lacuma trees, to talk to Gaia herself, the whole thing, and to show Gaia where this thing is now, ask for intelligent guidance, and also ask for help from Gaia, clues, little clues. Paul Stamets, for example, one of the clues, he'll be on this in a week from today, learning one day that if bees ate these mycelial secretions, it helped them deal with colony collapse disorder. You know, that was an important clue. And perhaps we can reverse the collapse of the bee population. And it's his intimate connection with that fungal intelligence of Gaia, a lifetime of work, that led to this clue that Gaia is helping us deal with this stress on bee populations. So it's listening, and in a way, to go back to Terence, is to say, is to open oneself, even beyond what Terence would say, to open our hearts and our minds to the totality of what is, of Gaia, of the complexity of human beings, of the human heart, of the human trauma. Help us forward. And I call this the field, this huge interconnected intelligence that arranges all the synchronicities that seem to govern our lives. I talk to this field all the time, and I say, hey, buddy, can you help us out? Can you help guide us? Send us more synchrony, shape probability, get us through. We're not alone. We are not alone. This field is working for us. We can reach out to and ask it to help and guide us.
Well, this is inspiring. So we are Gaia does have compassion by this perspective, and is actually trying to help us along its most problematic species. I mean, Gaia must wonder, geez, I really screwed up when I came up with these monkeys, but maybe something good could come out of it. I see Genevieve is there. I guess that's a sign that we're just about ready to do some questions. Is that right?
Yes, it is about that time. And thank you, Bruce, so much. Dennis, thank you as well. This has been an amazing conversation. And thank you for bringing it so pertinent to these current issues that we're facing right now. So moving into the Q&A, we'll be here for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have the breakout sessions and a short break before Luis Eduardo Luna comes on. So I'm going to pull up some questions here.
Okay.
Let's see. The first one I'm going to bring up is a question for you, Dennis. It says, Dennis, I was curious of your thoughts regarding the lemon technique of taking mushrooms. There seems to be debate over whether citric acid is capable of dephosphorylating 4-PPO-DMT into 4-HO-DMT. Yet consensus on the subjective effect seems to be that it speeds up onset by an hour, and potency is also about 2 to 3 times the standard form of ingestion. Possibly the process of grinding and immersing the fruiting body of the mushroom helps to release some actives bound in the chitin and protein.
Oh gosh, it's above my pay grade. I mean, they're basically saying that extracting the mushrooms with a bit of citric acid will dephosphorylate the psilocybin. Well, that readily happens anyway. I mean, that's just, cells are equipped with the enzymes to move phosphoryl groups on and off molecules. That's universal. I am not sure what the person's, what the person is asking here. There are ways to increase the potency of psilocybin, of mushrooms. Sometimes people add Syrian rue or even Banisteriopsis because those have MAO inhibitors, so they will inhibit the breakdown of psilocybin and at least may increase the intensity, but also increase the time frame. I personally think that maybe psilocybin is practically the perfect drug, the perfect psychedelic. Terence used to say it was made for man. I don't think he meant to exclude women. I think he meant it was made for humans. And in some ways it is. I mean, it's short acting, it's non-toxic. The effects are usually quite compatible there in most of the time, not always, but most of the time the experiences are not threatening. It fits very well into a clinical paradigm as well as a shamanic paradigm. So in some ways, I'm amused in a way by all of these startup psychedelic companies that are happening, especially where I live in British Columbia. They're popping up all over the place, like mushrooms, actually. And they all have an agenda. They want to improve on psilocybin. Let's make an analog that's even better than psilocybin. And to which I respond, how do you improve on perfection? The molecule is marvelously engineered by nature to do exactly what it does. And how's that for dodging the question? Let's go on to the next one.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. All right, so we'll move on to the next question. Shifting gears a little bit, Dennis, what do you think Terence would have thought or felt about social media platforms? This is definitely interesting considering that his message has been spread so much farther through mediums like YouTube and whatnot.
Bruce may be better qualified for this answer because he knows much more about social media than I do. My sort of initial take is that Terence probably would have been appalled by social media, in a certain way, because he was, for all that he was enthusiastic about cyberspace and the potential for getting his message out on the web, and I think many things that Bruce basically opened his eyes to about the potential of cyberspace. But he personally was a 19th century, like me. We grew up with books. Books is what shaped our intellects, our personalities, and to read a book is a quintessentially solitary experience. You're there with the book, and you're having this dialogue with the book. Other outside influences are excluded if you pay attention to the book. So I think Terence is, in terms of the inclinations of his personality, I don't think he would have liked social media very much. He would have seen that as a threat to his personal integrity. You know, on the other hand, he probably would have recognized the potential of it. I mean, his attitude is probably very similar to mine, which is that because in order to do what I have to do, I can't step out of social media. You know, I have to use it. There's no other way to do it. On the other hand, I know that it's, you know, it's a can of worms. It's a pit of snakes. It's, you know, very difficult to work with it and maintain your perspective, and you're opening yourself up to, you know, a lot of things. So I don't know. What do you think he would have made of social media, Bruce? This is one of the things that just wasn't even imagined by anybody in 2000 when Terence left. So what do you think?
Sitting in his house, watching him on his Mac, on his weird satellite connection, he was absolutely entranced. Like many of you may not know that Terence was a hunt and peck typer. He used 2 fingers. It is so crazy that he wrote all these books, hunt and peck, chew. This is how this guy did it. But we had a mailing list that he was on. He was so attached to it. I don't think he was ever on the well on forums and stuff, but the guy he was a natural hermit. And this was comfortable for him. So seeing him upstairs in the library on virtual worlds, on chats, on lists, I think he would have swum like a fish in it. And it would have allowed him the freedom to stay at home and not travel as much, because he was getting totally burned out on it.
Yes.
When we arrived in Captain Cook, he said, "I am so tired. I am so tired. All this travel and stuff." So I don't know. I think he would have just embraced it.
He would have taken to it. He would have jumped in and gone with it.
Now
I mean, I can certainly relate to Terence's aversion to traveling. You know, last year I was doing so much that I was telling people, I just can't keep doing this. This is killing me. You know, and I've got to step away from doing all this traveling. Well, guess what? Somebody somewhere heard that, because, you know, I was given this gift. We're doing all this stuff and I'm not traveling. And like Terence, you know, I'm an introvert. My inclination is toward hermitage, and maybe these technologies are great for hermits, you know, because as you say, you can interact with thousands of people. You don't have to step out of your basement office or whatever it is. So it's very interesting that way, you know. And if you don't, I don't know. So there you have it, 2 different perspectives.
I did see another question about AI and singularities. Is that one we can do, Genevieve?
Yes, let me pull that question up right now. Thank you for that,
Sure.
Bruce, and thank you, Dennis.
Yeah.
So the question is singularity, artificial intelligence, and the nature of consciousness.
Yeah, because I wanted to bring this up because Terence and I had practically an all-night conversation on this. And it started out with him saying, and there's actually recordings of this online. Terence says to me, and you can just see his hand in the camera, he says, "You're not one of those people who believes that suddenly one day technology, software will wake up, become super intelligent, and have no more use for us." Because he kind of sensed that I'm a hardcore reductionist. I need to see evidence. I'm an engineer. I build a lot of software. I know how fallible it is. And he knew that I was not in that whole thing. So I spent the next hour explaining to him the difference between computing systems and natural systems. And that computing systems were brittle, usually single-threaded, usually extremely one-dimensional or two-dimensional, and They didn't use genes. They weren't subject to the laws of evolution, and they did everything in what's known as a predictable method, not using what's called stochastics, where things are kind of random. And that a glass of water does more computation than all the Macs, like Terence's Mac, in the world. And that the medium of life is vastly different from the medium of computing. And that I spent the next 20 years working on this, working on what is novelty. How do things compress into novelty? We talked about that night. Worked it out. We worked out a formula by 2011. We found a formula called the cosmic wiggle in honor of Terence's cosmic giggle. We worked it out. And because of that conversation that night. But what I brought to Terence was, Terence, there is no way that there's going to be a technological singularity. No one understands consciousness. No one understands the complexity of biology. It's a sci-fi idea, and we shouldn't be worried about it. We should focus on different things, which is how do these systems serve humans in synergy and marvelous synergy with human beings for our survival and our joy and our entertainment, things like this. And by about 2 a.m, Terence said, well, because he also asked me about Y2K, and I said, Terence, nothing is going to happen in Y2K. It's a big overblown thing, and nothing's going to happen in 2012 either. And Terence kind of sat back and took another toke and said, well, I hope they don't take it all too literally. You know, it was his shtick. It was his thing. It got butts in seats and everything. And it was just kind of like, it's entertainment. But and nothing did happen at Y2K, and nothing happened at 2012. And I think we got cured of that.
Two of the biggest non-events in human history.
Yeah, and
Y2K in 2012. I mean, that's interesting that these hugely anticipated events turn out to be duds, essentially duds.
Yeah,
the expectation is deflated, and we move on. And now here we are, 8 years later. Nobody predicted this. But this is sort of like, this is the paradigm changer. This is in some ways, eschatological event that the time wave was supposed to predict. Of course, it didn't. But that this eschatological expectation. Now we may be there, And so you contributed quite significantly to the collapse of Terence's worldview. I mean, it wasn't bad enough that mathematicians had come along and threw cold water on the time wave, and then you came along, and I think Y2K, everyone was anticipating Y2K. He did not live to see the effect of that, but nothing happened.
What I can say is that conversation that night of Terence saying, what is novelty? How do things get together and form more complex things and not break apart? And because of that conversation, because of Terence, in the last time that I saw him, Terence said to me, keep telling the story. Keep telling the story, but tell your own story. And I took that to heart, that Terence had asked me to carry this work on, these questions.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, it resulted in this, in 2017, a scientific revolution. This is our work on the cover of Scientific American. And I have really Terence to thank, because he passed in April 3rd, 2000, and then I said, I'm going to continue to do this. And we did a massive computational research called the Evolution Grid, and then we turned it into chemistry when we realized computers couldn't help us solve the mystery of the origin of life. And we found a cycle in nature, wet, dry cycling in hot spring pools. We went to those pools and introduced the reagents that can come from space and form protocells. And we drove it all the way to the point where we saw novelty emerging from basic chemicals cycled in a system with energy, stepping up in the cosmic wiggle. And we could see that this is how life can get started. And my God, I mean, now we're mining this vein for more goodies. We're finding that, wow, life has three components. It has wiggling together, which is collaboration. It has memory, writing, and reading, because we're seeing the first genetic polymers possible in the system. And it has this kind of overall field effect that Rupert Sheldrake will talk about in 2 weeks, called the morphogenetic field. And he and I have talked about this now, how the origin of life is the origin of this field. So we're in huge pay dirt. If Terence was around today, he would be absolutely fascinated that we decoded this, and we're proving it in hardcore science, but it has impacts in philosophy and even spiritual pursuits. And we are carrying forward Terence's questions, his burning questions. And to me, it's very gratifying that to have had the short amount of interaction with your brother. I feel so grateful to have encountered him. I miss him. We were going to go on tour together. We were going to go to Esalen in 2000, and we were going to co-present. But I'm faithful to his request, and also how to merge the magic state, how to merge the magic with the mundane, if you will, and how to bring the Chalcedony jewels back from the machine elves to make them manifest in the world. That's the trick, right? And with the origin of life work, we've done that. We solved some of the major questions of the origin of life in the space of magic with a directed approach, and brought that and made it work in the physical world, and said thank you for being a space that we can go and do magic and make it real. And so Terence, I think his legacy was to keep the pilot light running for 20 years on this thing, and to tell the tale so well that it attracted people into magic, back to magic, like me. He enabled my first journey, and then we could compare notes. And what a great hyperboreal gatekeeper he was. And so I just wanted to, if we're concluding, just send out a huge wave of gratitude to this man, despite his foibles and his faults, and we all have them. But thank you for telling the tale in such a Joycean, silvery way of the magic, to attract us all, to make a signpost, to have us all go and seek out the magic, that there is more than the mundane, and that we can blend them together and make beautiful existences.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Bruce. Dennis, do you have anything that you'd like to add to that, or should we move on to another question? That was really, really incredible.
Well, it's hard to top that. I think so I won't even try. I think Bruce provided an excellent closer, and I like your metaphor. Terence did keep the pilot light going. He lit the pilot light. The pilot light's been burning, and now maybe it's time to turn up the heat, but not in a global sense. But yes,
Well,
and that's always been his role in some ways. He's been, I mean, at the height of his career in the 80s and 90s, it wasn't cool to go into public and talk about psychedelics. I mean, for most people, that was appalling. I mean, of course, for the people he talked to, they loved it. But you have to hand it to him that he, in an era when the very idea of touting the benefits of drugs was, not politically correct, he kept the conversation open. And now look where we are. Terence remarked to me, I think he made a remark in public about the relationship to the mushrooms and bringing the mushrooms, into society, which we had something to do. He said, we're involved in a symbiotic relationship with something that's disguised itself as an alien invasion so as not to alarm us. Right. And basically here we are. I mean, the mushrooms did invade our society through the basements of every 10th grade nerd that wanted to work on a project, a science fair project, perfect for that. And that's the way it affected the revolution. Not a shot was fired. And now it exists, and now we're in an era where people are beginning to notice the potential of mushrooms, and of course they're not just the medical potential, but the economic potential, and we'll see how that plays out. The point is that he kept the conversation alive, during what was effectively the Dark Ages. So good for him.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That actually kind of segued into the next question, which was towards both of you, as far as what do you feel that Terence's greatest contributions were and what his greatest ideas were. And you, Bruce, thank you so much. That was really beautiful. We've got about 5 minutes left on the question and answer section. So Dennis, I was wondering if you have any final thoughts with that question in the forefront of your thoughts on Terence's greatest contributions and his ideas.
Well, I think, he had, I think that in some way his greatest contribution was he gave people permission to play with their imagination, and he gave people permission to think outside the box because he did it so well. And he was so good at conveying that to people. And I think, a lot of his specific contributions, they're interesting. The time wave, and, it was very interesting. The bringing the mushrooms into society is certainly something that, I would say that was a collaboration between the two of us. So if you want to put your marker down and say, what are the most significant things, you could look at that. But I think the most significant thing is that Terence enjoyed playing with ideas, and he gave other people permission to play with ideas, and I think he reached a certain point in his life toward the end of the 80s, early 90s, where he was having some doubts about some of the ideas that he'd kind of hitched his wagon to, if it was, but he was I think people misunderstand that he took these ideas totally seriously. I don't think he did. I think they were idea complexes that he liked to play with. He didn't necessarily say this is true. He's just saying maybe it's true, or wouldn't it be fun if it were true? I think his playful attitude toward manipulating these concepts and just throwing it out there, not that you're saying this is absolute revealed truth, but rather here's an interesting idea. What do you think? And then inviting feedback. So he gave permission to people to do that, to learn how to use their imaginations.
Could I add a little bit to that too?
Of course.
We've got about 3-4 minutes left, but yes, please, Bruce.
So for me, when I hear him start a rap, you sit back, and this man, however he did it, he would take you into a space He would take you into a new world, and then he would cycle back magically. He would come back to the original thing, and then he would trip it more, and he would cycle it more and cycle it more and cycle it more. He was an absolute master, an absolute master. I mean, having studied James Joyce and all these absolute masters, for me, it's just the high art of his skill. And whatever material it was, just as Dennis is saying, he could be reading from the telephone book. And for me, he was my mentor in not only the high quality of the telling and the threading of the story and the circling back, but of his absolute gentlemanly consideration and care for his listeners, for his audience, his politeness, his patience with questions, and the fact that he took every question as though it was the most important question. He never dismissed anyone. He was such a beautiful gentleman in this world, and he's an example for us talking heads of how to do it really right.
Yes, exactly. He never, and I guess it comes from experience, because he was quite comfortable putting out, the craziest notions, right? And yet he did it with such skill that people who were normally skeptical could hear that and say, well, maybe there's something to that, maybe mushrooms are from the stars, which would normally be something, that would be as difficult to defend as, the flat earth hypothesis, which is, and yet he could make it sound plausible. And partly it was, it was because of the way that he presented it, just the way he said it, because clearly he's not crazy. He's not a raving lunatic. He talks in a very calm, focused manner. And then when you get to the next level and focus on what he's saying, you're like, what? What is he saying? And so it's interesting. He's sometimes called the bard, the bard of psychedelics. And and I guess he could make a legitimate claim to that. But in some way, he's also the trickster. He's the person that makes you doubt what you think that challenges your assumptions, and that was a skill that he had.
Wonderful. Thank you both.
People have been talking ever since, right? Sorry.
So we're at about time. I really appreciate you both, and thank you so much to everyone for your questions. There's one more question that's just a technical one that I'll answer now. It's just, will there be a replay of the tribute to Terence if I'm not able to live watch tonight? And yes, you can come back to this link, and not only will this whole video and the chat be available, but you can also click on questions and it will bring you directly to that section of the talk. You can share this on social media. There's a button up at the top to share. And as we're progressing, I didn't say this earlier, but there is a button on the bottom left that says clip moment, and you'll be able to take a 15-second clip of the talk and post that directly to your social media channels.
And Genevieve, hopefully you can edit out the front where we were fumbling with my audio, because that wouldn't, can you chop that off before you post it?
I will make some requests to the tech team. One more thing, Bruce, where can we find you on online? Where is more of your work? We'd love to know more.
Yeah, thank you for the ability to plug. You can join me in Patreon. We're starting all these projects, so patreon.com/Bruce Damer, and we're doing weekly salons now, and we're starting initiatives from the Patreon. And on the Levity Zone podcast is my podcast, and if you want to know more about my work, and damer.com is my completely 90s 18th century website. And find me on Facebook, message me, because I get hundreds of requests, but I'd love to be in contact with you all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Dennis and Bruce, thank you very much for bringing this light to so many subjects over this time. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. We're going to move to our breakout session section. And if you go to the top of the screen, there's something that says schedule, and then there's a little more ... If you click on that, you can actually go to different segments of this overall series. And the breakout group is there and available for people. You can pick which breakout group you'd like to go to. Bruce is going to be in one of those breakout groups, and he'll be giving his science and magic segment. So be sure to catch him there. Yesterday, we had a few technical difficulties with people being able to get into the breakout group. So thank you for your patience. If that is the case, you are welcome to stay here in the chat room, and we will have a moderator here as well, so you can continue conversations this way. So this is going to be about 40 minutes, 30 minutes for the breakout sessions, and then 10 minutes in break. And we'll be back at 2:30 with Dennis McKenna and Luis Eduardo Luna. Thank you so much, all of you.
So we go, Genevieve, we go to the chat room with Dr. Bruce Damer. Is that where we find?
Bruce,
or the one above that?
Bruce will be in a specific breakout group. You can see that there are different subjects for the breakout groups. There's therapeutic use and recreational use, acceptance, integration, don't give way to astonishment, and there's a chat room, actually, excuse me.
Oh, I see.
The chat room has Bruce Damer, so I'm going to move everyone over there now, and then you can select breakout groups if you'd like to go to those. Thank you.
Right. Okay, I see.
All righty.
All right.